Now might be a really good time to get excited.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Jam-packed show today. Absolutely jam-packed. And I'll give you a quick tease for what I'm going to discuss tomorrow here at the Locked On Network. We have our top 100 players in college football. Here's where Oregon's players rank. Mateo, 33. Bryce, 83. Kenyon, 75. Poncho, 94. That's tomorrow's show. Today's show, though, Tank Jones suddenly has picked up a crystal ball to Oregon. He is committing on the Pat McAfee show. I don't know why I didn't pronounce that correctly. Boy, my English is all over the place. I'm just that excited about what could be happening here. Later today, as this show airs, Thursday, July 31st. That comes, of course, ahead of August 2nd, which could be a big day. You might see both Devon Benjamin and Deuce Gerald's commit to Oregon's class of 2026. But this Tank Jones revelation is a big one for a couple of reasons. Number one, presuming he commits to the Ducks, I expect him to. I heard from a source that Oregon is in a really good spot. There is a high-level confidence crystal ball in for him to go to the Ducks over at 24/7 Sports. When those happen this late in the process, something pretty dramatic would have to change between now and commitment time for him to not go to the Ducks. And that doesn't mean it can't. We've been down this road, Richard Wesley, before with big-time defensive line recruits, or any recruit, quite frankly. There was the Peyton Bowen situation a couple years ago with the paperwork and it not getting in time. And, the more I think about, anytime I think about that, I realize how impactful that was, given how Oregon's safety play has been over the last couple of cycles. But they're recruiting that position incredibly well for the class of 2026. But a late crystal ball to come into Oregon, plus I hear from somebody, Oregon should be in a pretty good position here. This is a game changer, because not just on the field, but in Oregon's 2026 recruiting class specifically, this is a late shift. This has been Alabama for quite a while, several weeks at this point. And that's why you wait for commitment day. And I'm sure there are plenty of people that want to wait for Penn to get put to paper here. But Tank Jones would be another 5-star recruit in Oregon's class, joining guys like Kendra Harrison and Jet Washington, of course, because this would be a really, really good place for Oregon to go, not just because you'd be getting a tremendously talented player, but because a late shift in the recruiting wins like this can start to snowball momentum. And that would be a really good thing to see. Now, Oregon's class right now on the 24/7 rankings currently ranks outside of the top 10 nationally. I do not expect that to be the case by the time the 2026 class comes to a close. I also do not expect that they fall close. See, Tank Jones would be a game changer. He'd be a game changer. There'd just be Oregon's fourth 5-star commit in the class of 2026. You've got Ihanicho, you've got Kendra Harrison, the tight end, and Jet Washington. If you put Tank Jones into that fold, Oregon might be closer to a top 5 class than a top 10 class. Now, I have said for quite a while here on the show, I don't think they can pull a top 5 class. One of the reasons I said that at the time was Tank Jones, because you had to go out and probably get Tyler Atkinson. They did not. He went to Texas, quite a great pull out of Kirby Smart's backyard for Steve Sarkisian and company there in Austin. But the other reason was, Oregon would probably need another 5-star recruit in order to jump into the top 5 for high school recruiting for a third consecutive year, something they've never done before. They're currently on a recruiting run at a level that we've never seen for Oregon before, with back-to-back top 5 classes. Now, that's ever so slightly inflated because of the JKS situation there, and he was never really supposed to commit to Oregon. But still, Lanning has got this staff in such a good spot, and this would be a premier defensive recruit that would add to a pretty darn good class of defensive linemen. You've got Prince Tabazon, who reclassified from the class of 2027. Tony Cumberland, the Willamette High School kid, has been committed to the Ducks since September 23rd, 2023. And he's a really highly rated 4-star guy. You've got Dutch Horisk in the fold as well. If you put Tank Jones in there, you don't just have, a foundational piece for the defensive line class in 2026. You've got a foundational piece for your class. Like he's a guy that you can build a lot around, but he's kind of an additive piece at this point to a recruiting class that has 15 players right now, and I think we'll get around 20. Last year they had 19. I think they'll be pretty small again. And when you go big game hunting the way Oregon has, you're going to have some strikeouts. You're going to swing and miss. If you sit on a fastball every single time when a fastball heavy pitcher is on the mound, you're going to get that fastball a good amount, and sometimes you're going to whiff, and he's going to decide, I'm going to throw 50% sliders today to keep you off your feet, or off balance. On your toes is the expression I was looking for there. So could be a really, really good weekend of recruiting here for Oregon. If they land all three of these guys, top 5 class to me is in the fold. The reason Oregon's class is ranked so high is that they have a really high average recruiting ranking. Devon Benjamin is a really highly rated guy. Deuce Geralds is a top 100 player as well. And Tank Jones is one of, if not the highest ranked uncommitted players in the class of 2026. He's certainly up there. So if you can pull all three, I mean, that would shift the narrative pretty considerably. And I think Oregon's class is in a good spot, just to be clear. There's a lot of talent. There's solid positional versatility here. You've got your quarterback with Bryson Beaver, but I think that Jones would be just such an awesome addition if he winds up coming into the fold. And that's not something that I expected to happen, because I, and really everybody else that covers recruiting, even closer than I do, expected that Tank Jones was Alabama. I heard that from 2 different sources that, over the last several weeks that, he's Alabama, and then all of a sudden there's a shift to Oregon. So this could be a real igniting of a snowball, which is, again, an interesting metaphor. I'm all over the place in this first segment today, but I'm just excited at the prospect of this happening. And of course, I'll have a reaction to wherever he commits on tomorrow's show. Alabama, I'm sure, is still going to try to get back in the fold here, and the Crimson Tide have had a really good offseason of recruiting under Kalen DeBoer, a name I'm sure all of us remember down there in Tuscaloosa now. But if Tank Jones winds up committing to Oregon, boy, that would be a big piece of news, and I'd be stoked for a number of reasons. So hopefully it's an optimistic tone for my first segment on tomorrow's show. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, all of that good stuff. A thought on the Penn State game. Could Oregon have one advantage? I hadn't thought of this, but it was pointed out to me, and it can't be ignored. First, this episode brought to you by Drip Drop. If you're trying to stay on top of your routine, whether that's workouts, long days on campus, staying focused in back-to-back classes, or the golf course, hydration is where it all starts. And that is where Drip Drop comes in. Drip Drop is doctor-developed and scientifically proven for fast hydration. It uses the perfect balance of sodium electrolytes and glucose to help your body absorb fluids quickly, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of a leading sports drink. When I'm out on the golf course, I am always thinking about what I am eating and how I'm keeping myself hydrated, especially in the summer months, because if you start to wear down out there because of the conditions and you don't take care of yourself, your game's going to suffer as a result. This is a very real and serious thing if you're a golfer or whatever you are in terms of physical activity. You know you want to stay hydrated. Drip Drop is the place to make that happen. Right now, Drip Drop is offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first order. Just head to dripdrop.com, use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege. That's dripdrop.com. Promo code LOCKEDONCollege for 20% off your order. Stock up now before the heat hits hard. Second segment sip all done. It's not a drip drop level of hydration, but it's enough. It's enough. Drip Drop is superior. Here's a thought on the Penn State game. Which one of you sent a question about. The mailbag questions have been on fire for the last couple of weeks in particular. YouTube comments, become a Locked On Ducks insider. Twitter, always get in the mailbag. If you're an insider, you get priority mailbag access and a bunch of other perks as well. Link in the description below for a free 14-day trial. With Allen and Singleton returning for Penn State, that's their running backs, I think they rely heavy on the run this year. Zach Sako of Locked On Any Lines agrees. I know they've made key additions to their offense, but I don't trust that Aller is comfortable being forced into a heavy passing attack. I also don't know if their O-line stacks up with Oregon's defensive line and that this is a defensive decided game. And Mateo, along with the rest of the front, limits the run, forcing Aller to pass more than he'd like, and Oregon can walk out of Happy Valley with a defensive win in the range of 17-10. So, the thought about the Penn State game I hadn't considered previously isn't what you're alluding to here. It's actually something that Ryan Herrings of Locked On Badgers talked about over on our Locked On Big Ten squad today, which are a ton of fun. Go check them out where it'll show up right in this feed, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on podcast. He pointed out that Penn State is indeed at home off a bye when they play Oregon. Their non-conference schedule is a joke. It's Indiana level bad. So they won't have played for a couple weeks, so they'll be well rested, but they will not have been seriously pushed or challenged. They're favored, I think, in their first game by something around 45 points. That could be the line for all of their non-conference games. It's an incredibly weak schedule before they play Oregon. And you contrast that to the Ducks. I'm not saying Oregon is going through a murderer's row here, but Penn State is playing Nevada, FIU, and Villanova. Oregon is playing Montana State and FCS, just like Villanova is, Oklahoma State, a Power 4, Oregon State in a rivalry game, and Northwestern. Northwestern comes before Oregon State. So the Ducks will be fresh off a game where a team that doesn't have as much talent as them, but is still respectable, solid, should be a bowl team this year in Oregon State, is going to give them their very best punch because they would love nothing more than to get a win over the Ducks. It'd be a landmark victory for Trent Bray in his tenure going into his second season taking over for Jonathan Smith. And all of a sudden, I just looked at this game and thought, wow, I hadn't considered that. So it's a scheduling advantage for Penn State. They're at home off a bye, long trip for Oregon, who's playing consecutive game number 5. But the battle-tested part, I'm not kidding, it gave me a little bit more confidence. I've said all offseason, I expect Oregon to lose that game. They're a 4.5-point underdog, according to our friends at FanDuel. I put the shoe mentally on the other foot in my head and thought, how would I feel if Oregon had played 3 really easy games, took a week off, and then had Penn State come to them? I could very easily, if I was being a negative Nelly, talk myself into this is a horrible place for Oregon to be. Maybe they come out of the gate sluggish, but Penn State will have their home crowd in a whiteout behind them, so I'm not necessarily anticipating that. But if Oregon physically can go and throw the first punch in that game, like think Utah 2023, on the Ducks versus them after that one, which was College Game Day, Dan Lanning said, if they win the toss, I hope they give us the ball. If we win the toss, we are going to take the ball. I want the ball first. I want to go into that stadium, and I want to silence the crowd, march right down the field, and they marched right down the field, including with a play that they called Train Right March, which is just a bunch on the end line of the line of scrimmage. You pulled 2 tight ends around to lead for Bucky Irving, who got down to the 1-yard line, and then Bo Nix ran it in. Not that I remember weird things, but anyway. So that game went very well. Oregon was a 6.5-point favorite, and they won by a lot. It was like 35-6, I think it was. So just consider that angle. Let me know what you think about that, because I hadn't had that thought before. Back to your question, though, about Penn State. I totally agree. They're going to be a run-first team. You know, they remind me a lot of Michigan from 2 years ago. J.J. McCarthy was drafted in the first round, as Drew Aller will be, because of his physical traits, not necessarily his production. Aller's 6'5", moves and has a humongous arm. He can make special throws. He'll get taken in the first round. J.J. McCarthy didn't have incredible numbers. He had 22 touchdowns and 5 picks his last year at Michigan. And they ran the ball with great backs. I think they'll do that. Where I disagree with you is that Penn State's O-line doesn't stack up to Oregon's defensive line, because we saw in the Big Ten championship game, and Penn State returns 3 or 4 starters from that unit, Oregon's D-line is going to be really good. But when you don't have Jamari Caldwell or Derek Harmon or Jordan Birch, they will have had time to settle into their rotations and whatnot. But overall, Oregon's defensive line, I think, is the best unit on this team. I don't think it's quite as good as last year. And Penn State, with Andy Kotelnicki, their offense coordinator, being incredibly clever and creative and calling the right stuff at the right time, they ran all over Oregon. Drew Allard didn't have a huge game, and Penn State scored 37 points. Why? Because they ran the football up and down the field. So I do think run defense is paramount. That'll probably be one of my top keys for the Penn State game when Oregon goes there on September 27th. But a defensively sided game, could it be a slugfest? I mean, we haven't seen Oregon win a big slugfest game in the Dan Lanning era. You think of the biggest wins, it was the blowout I mentioned against Utah, Ohio State 32-31, Penn State 45-37. That doesn't mean that Dan Lanning isn't, doing his job as a former defensive coordinator and now head coach, because that's the way the game goes sometimes, and the object is to win no matter how it looks. But Utah 2022, when Bo Nix was hobbled, final score of that game was, I think, 17-10. 14? Let me look at that real quick. Utah, Oregon football 2022 was 2017. Yeah, that's like the lowest scoring, high profile game that Oregon has had. And when you're in that environment, Penn State's going to have a really good defense. Jim Knowles is a brilliant defensive coordinator. I think it's more likely both teams are kind of in the 20s, maybe 30 range or so, just because there's so much talent there. But would it be interesting to see, an Oregon-Penn State game that is 17-10? Yeah, and I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility with how these teams play and what their personnel are top to bottom. So, yeah, I think that a couple of different interesting ways to look at that Penn State game this year. Nick sent this one in. Under-the-radar breakout candidate, Jamari Johnson. With Sadiq being used all over the field, Johnson produces in the more traditional tight end role and matches Sadiq's numbers from last year with 24 catches for 308 yards. So T. Ferg had just under 600 yards last year, I'm pretty sure, and Sadiq was in that 300-yard range. So I don't know if there are going to be, I think Johnson will see the field a really hefty amount. Yeah, 591 and 3 touchdowns for Terrence Ferguson. Remember how long it took for a tight end to score a touchdown? That was a fun, tiny storyline. That's how good Oregon was last year, that was a legit talking point. When's a tight end going to score a touchdown? First world problem. That's the highest class society problems there in a football standpoint. But Johnson's got real potential. He's coming off an injury last year, coming over from Louisville. Oregon's number 2 tight ends have been involved. You'd have to define breakout candidate for me specifically if you want to go for a guy that is going to have the best statistical season of his career. I could definitely see it. Johnson at Louisville last year, 13 catches in 7 games for 158 yards and a touchdown. He could definitely go over that. So if that's your definition of breakout candidate, I'll put a 7.5 for Spencer Scale of Agreement that he breaks out and gets over 200 yards, just because no matter who the tight end has been, Terrence Ferguson, a second-round tight end, and there was still a tight end over 300 yards a year ago. They just use multiple tight ends in their passing offense a lot, in the screen game or otherwise, and Sadiq is very unique. And so, you can put 2 on the field, but line up Kenyon and all the way out wide if you want to, or put him in the slot. You could literally put him, you could put Kenyon Sadiq anywhere on the field, which is really cool. So, yeah, I think Johnson can get over 300 yards on the season. Maybe he catches a couple touchdowns. He's a big-bodied guy, 6'5", not athletic like Sadiq, but, I mean, who is at the tight end position? Answer is really nobody there. So, yeah, it's a good under-the-radar breakout candidate. Keep submitting those. I like that question I put out there recently. I'm going to get to some more on tomorrow's show that one of you submitted. Another question that came from a Locked On Ducks insider. that is legitimately one of the toughest questions I have ever had to answer on the show. I was asked what my favorite Oregon regular season victory is of all time. Oh man, let's debate that in the comments. I mean, ones that come to mind: 2009 USC, 2021 Ohio State, 2018 Washington, 2010 Oregon State to clinch berth in the national championship game, 2010 Stanford, 2010 Tennessee is up there. 2014 Michigan State at home, Efo's pick, Mariota's flip to Freeman on 3rd and 11. A lot of good stuff there. I think because of what it signified, I am going to go with 2009 USC. You know, that was a changing of the guard. Chip Kelly, who is now Pete Carroll's offensive coordinator in the NFL, if you can believe that, with the Raiders, ran Pete Carroll out of the Pac-10, and Brent Musburger correctly declared there's a new king in the Pac-10 because Oregon went for 600 yards of offense on USC's defense, and that just didn't happen. So, yeah, and I remember watching that with my friends Halloween night. My brother and a buddy were at that game. So I'm going 2009 USC. There are a lot of good options. Drop yours in the comments below. That's a tough question. Tough question. A new Duck, and could Dante Moore be different than I thought? So another guy who got mentioned in Dan Lanning's press conference the other day before fall camp got underway was Bear Alexander, the USC defensive line transfer, who I think amongst a lot of college football fans, public, and maybe some media folks as well, and I get it, doesn't have a sparkling reputation because he went around to a number of different high schools, and then he went around from Georgia to USC, and then that situation got a little weird. I think he left the team after a few games last year. Now he's with the Ducks. And, the question was asked to Lanning with the qualifier that, people say he's a really good guy and he's liked amongst his teammates and all that sort of stuff. I get why people look at, his track record and say, I don't know what really to expect here. I don't know what kind of guy he is. I've never met him personally. I'm just saying if you take a 30,000-foot view at it, I get how you say, oh, he's just going around from one school to another, no loyalty, and all that sort of stuff can form. I think he's in a great spot with Oregon for a couple of reasons. Number one, Dan Lanning has proven that he can rehabilitate highly rated defensive linemen from the SEC that didn't pan out all the way. See Jordan Burch. That's who I hope Bear Alexander kind of becomes. Not stylistically, Bear's an inside player primarily, and Burch mostly played strong side defensive end. But, his transformation was pretty notable. Like when he left South Carolina, I remember talking to our Locked On Gamecocks host at the time about it. And he said, yeah, I mean, we saw all this potential, but it didn't really click. It didn't happen here. Oregon's defense last year had a lot of impact players. Jordan Burch was one of them. Dude literally wrecked an entire drive against UCLA on his own. It was, I think the progression was sack, deflected pass, sack. All Jordan Burch. And that was the potential that never fully got there. And so what did he have as, spotty of a track record as Bear Alexander? No, he did not. The premise is still the same, though. You come to Oregon, you can get drafted in the first 3 rounds along the defensive line. Some guys are more ready, like Derek Harmon. Other guys were not as ready and stayed for 2 years, like Jordan Burch, and played himself into being a 3rd-round pick. So that's the first angle to look at Bear Alexander. The second one is, I think, like DeCorian Moore, he's in a perfect spot where he's going to have the opportunity to play, but if he doesn't pan out for one reason or another, I'm not that worried about it. If Oregon ends up having to start at defensive tackle Aiden Breland and Amari Washington instead of Amari Washington, which I'm chair of the Amari Washington fan club, by the way, if you didn't know. If it ends up being Amari and Breland instead of Amari and Bear, I'm not worried. Like the One Republic song, I ain't worried about it. The depth in that room is so crazy good. And I mean, you talk about Jericho Johnson, who looked awesome in spring ball. Tioni Gray has always generated some buzz. Terrence Green might be the biggest guy on Oregon's team. And by the way, Amari Washington, heights and weights came out. At least I saw it going around, is around 6'3", 330. Amari Washington is way too fast to be 330 pounds. But he is, which is cool. That's why I'm chair of his fan club. So I think Bear probably starts, but if he doesn't wind up starting and he's a depth piece, what a depth piece for Oregon to have. Guy was a borderline 5-star recruit coming out of high school. But when you've got Breland in the fold, when you've got Washington, Green is probably ready to contribute, I think that Oregon's interior D-line's in a great spot. One of you sent this question, and curious about your thoughts on what Dante Moore said about getting his speed up to 21.5 miles per hour and how you think this will help his game. Well, first of all, apparently EA College Football 26 does know ball, because if you've played with him in the game, which I have, he is really fast. Feels like he is a faster quarterback in the game than Dylan Gabriel was, and Gabriel, much more of a runner than I expect Dante Moore to be. But two thoughts here on Dante Moore, who said that at Oregon Media Day recently. There's no downside to having speed. Speed kills forever and always. Nothing negative comes from Dante Moore having high-end speed like that. First thing. Second thing, I still don't think he's going to be a runner. He doesn't, his straight line speed might be good, but I think you're going to see him run on the same sort of career trajectory that Justin Herbert did. Maybe it's called upon in a big spot when required, but it's not going to be something that you see him do all the time. Prior to the injury in 2022 against Washington, and then it changed a bit with Will Stein, who of course is still the OC, Bo Nix ran quite a bit. I don't think you'll ever see Dante Moore run that much. Is it great to have in the back pocket? Yeah, because sometimes guys are not going to be open on 3rd and 7, and you got to figure out how to pick up a third down. And God willing, he knows how to both slide and not take a big hit because we want to keep him out there, of course. But yeah, it's definitely faster than I would have expected. I think that's a similar high-end speed. I think Kenyon Sadiq tops out at 23 miles per hour with a 41-inch vertical, but Dante being at 21.5, it does nothing but help your game. I don't think it changes his game, though. I think he's going to still be primarily a pocket guy, but if every now and then he uses his legs to make a play, hey, I'm here for it. So I'm also here for Oregon trivia. So are all of you. I continue to love this. The two from yesterday, I was kind of close, but not that close. I was kind of close on one, and I was not close on the other. What was the score of Oregon's worst loss in history? 1974. The person who sent me this trivia question was at the game as a sophomore at Oregon. 66-0, the final score. Yikes. But the previous year, against Washington at Autzen, Oregon won 58-0. What a swing. I ran the math. That is a 124-point swing from one year to the next. I can confidently say we won't see that again. I know that Cliff Harris coined the term natty as it's used today. Here's one for today, and then a fun question to end the show. Which Oregon player has the most Super Bowl rings? He kept bouncing around as a goal line specialist in the 2010s on 3 different teams. I'm going to guess LeGarrette Blount. That is my guess. Can't wait to see that answer. And then another fun question to wrap today's show. Liam says, question for the pod. If you had to put every Big Ten team into a Harry Potter house, where would they go? Minimum 3 teams a house, maximum 5. Thanks. Keep up the good work. So Slytherin, of course, has to have a villainous component to them. Gryffindor, the schools that are fighting to do it the right way and just have all the integrity in the world and such. Hufflepuff is You love them because they just they do a little bit of everything in a sense. And Ravenclaw, the Brainiacs. So I'll start with Slytherin, Ohio State, Oregon, and USC. 100% Oregon belongs in there. Like, they put a giant duck at the last year's media days in Indianapolis, their first year in the league. They won the league their first year in the conference. That's kind of villain behavior, Ohio State and USC, I don't think I have to explain those. But Gryffindor, I've got Nebraska, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Indiana. You can't root against them, Kind of the same with Hufflepuff. Penn State, Rutgers, Michigan State, Illinois, Maryland. What do you dislike about any of those programs? I don't know where it comes from. I've got Washington and Ravenclaw because of their academic prowess, along with UCLA, Northwestern, Michigan, and Purdue, all really, really fine academic institutions there. So, fun, unique questions, trivia. I love off-season content, but the real season is less than a month away. Get excited. Appreciate everyone listening. I have to actually hit the right button. Wait for it. Here we go. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. Until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.